I change my brain? Am I just a victim to who I am? I'm your host, Steve Sisler. Stay tuned for another episode of Behavioral Insights.
Are you balanced? That's the question on today's episode 22. Emotional. Oh my God, why is this so freaking difficult? I thought I would leave in that blooper. Stay tuned. Okay, that's a pretty funny way to start off this episode. We're talking about emotional equilibrium, and what does that mean? So let's get into this pretty quickly here. I'm going to be talking about axiology again. Axiology is the science of value, and it's the very, very important work of Dr. Robert S. Hartman. You can look that up on Google if you want to. I'm not going to get into all that part of it right now, but I do want to talk about emotional equilibrium. So let's get into this. What does it mean? So there are two different worlds that we operate in. You need to understand this. You operate in what is known as the outer world, and you operate in what is known as the inner world. These two worlds have to be balanced. It is a must. Your brain must balance the two worlds for you to be harmonious in yourself. And so many people are in the work world today and they're not balanced. There's disunity between themselves and the world. And we're going to look at that today and what that can look like. So I have a profile up in front of me. It's a random profile. I just pulled it out, and I'm looking at it. The world scores in the HVP report really deal with your perception of the world. The world is everything around you. Everything around you. People, things, ideas. Okay? Those are the things that encompass you. They are around you. They're things you can bump into. You bump into people, you bump into cars, and you can actually bump into systems. You can bump into ideas. You can bump into the idea that you should be stopping or coming to a full stop at the stop sign, at the intersection, right? That's an idea. It's an idea about how it is supposed to be. I don't know if you've ever done a rolling stop and been stopped by the authorities. I have. And it's not very fun. But if I was tuned into and perceived with some positive attention the way it ought to be at an intersection, I wouldn't have got a ticket. So I bumped into it rather than submitted to it and therefore paid for it. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. So let's go to the outer world again from this wise. Within the outer world, there are three dimensions. I'm going to give you the scientific terms again for the dimensions that are in this outer world, and they are as follows: intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic. Those are the scientific terms for empathy, or what we call feeling. So intrinsic feeling is understanding and perceiving the intrinsic value of people. So this means seeing other people as unique individuals. Okay, this is intuition, folks. Empathy is all about intuition. The reason why anybody is empathetic begins with the fact that they are going to be intuitive. If you are not intuitive, the odds are going to be really good that you're not very empathetic. Okay? So this is an intuitive piece. It's an emotional, even spiritual, irreplaceable piece of people that we can perceive. So the value of another human being as they exist outside of time, okay? Outside of time. What does that mean? It means there are no time constraints when it comes to valuing human beings. The baby is still in the womb, yet a mother may cradle the baby bump with her arms because she's valuing the infant even before it fully arrives in the world. A person may visit the grave of a past loved one and stand there or sit down and talk to that person. You've seen what just came to my mind here was one of the Rocky movies, like I think maybe it was Rocky 6 or something, where he goes to the grave of his wife and just talks to her. So you could see there is no time constraints associated with valuing people. Even though they're gone, you can still hold them in value. My mom passed a year ago or so. And me and my sister will talk about this. And I was just in California visiting my sister, and we were sitting at the table reminiscing about my mom. It was like she's still there. There are times when I get up on a Saturday morning, I used to call my mom on Saturdays, and I actually go to my phone to get ready to call my mom and then realize she's not going to answer. It's a terrible feeling, to be honest. And I really miss it. But it's like my mom is still alive. The value didn't end when she passed. It is still there. So intrinsic value has no time constraints. That's what you need to understand. So this is really about the ability to see and appreciate the inner worth of other people, accepting them as they are without placing any stipulations or expectations on them outside of who they already are. This is just seeing people as is and accepting them that way. And again, this is an infinitive dimension. There is no time associated with it. All right, that's the empathetic piece. All right, let's move on to the practical judgment piece. So the first empathetic dimension is really about feeling, and the practical judgment piece is really about doing, and this does have time constraints. You need to move the car right now, okay? That's how that works. There's no infinity here. You can't move the car whenever you want to. You need to move the car right now. So this is really a results-oriented dimension. This is the extrinsic dimension, and it's really about doing things. So what does that mean? Material value, things, classes, or groups of things. As they serve useful roles or have functional value. The car has functional value because it gets me to the hospital right away. I can get in that car, start it, and start driving right now. And so this is about realistically determining what is next on the list of things to do. I just finished that. Now what? Notice the word now. So this is to know what to do and when to do it. This is really, folks, it's about common sense strategies. It's about comparing things. You could say good, better, or best. All right. It's about looking at functional material things and knowing that I need to do it right now, or I don't need to do it right now because it's not that important. It can be done later, but this other thing, it needs to be done right now. And so it's the opposite of procrastination. Okay? Procrastination deals with the future. And we're going to talk about that right now. So this is known as structured thinking. This is a systemic dimension within the world dimensions. It's the third dimension, and its time is future. So let me reiterate before I get into that piece. Empathy, which is about feeling, is infinitive. There is no time constraints when you're placing value, intrinsic, unique worth in people. There's no time on that, as we talked about. The next thing, practical judgment or doing things. I need you to get that done right now. So the time dimension is now. And then with the structured thinking piece, the systemic dimension, this is about analytical observation. It's about structure, order, or organization, consistency in thinking, all right? It's theoretical or conceptual, organization and planning. It's really about valuing what we believe ought to be. In an ideal sense, this printer should be closer to my desk because I have to use it every day. All right. So notice the word should be. That's a future tense, folks. All right. So this printer should be like this. It's not like that. That's the current situation, but it should be a hopeful future consideration, right? The printer should be near my desk, but it's not. So what am I going to do? So people that are more organized would notice that the printer should be closer to my desk because out of everybody in the office, I'm the one using it the most. So you're either, depending upon your behavioral and motivational framework, you're either going to move the printer, and if you can't do that, maybe you'll buy your own. Because what should be carries far greater weight than what already is, which is a practical current now dimension, the extrinsic dimension. I hope that's not confusing for you. Those are the three world dimensions. All right. Now, we're also measuring within each dimension when we run an HVP assessment on folks. We measure individual clarity levels. All right. There are 5. So within each dimension, and we'll start off with the empathetic dimension, and we'll use that as our example. So you know, let's say your clarity level is crystal clear. All right. That's the highest level of clarity. And what does it mean? It's really a very keen ability to understand or see into people and distinguish the differences between good and bad, right? Like, how clearly are you able to perceive people, right? How's your intuition is what I'm asking you. This is really about seeing all aspects about what is being viewed. So when you meet a person, let's say I tell you, hey, you're going to be working with Sally today. She's a great person, okay? And that's what I say to you. So let's say you start working with Sally. How clearly, what is your level of perception when you meet Sally, shake Sally's hand, watch Sally work, listen to Sally's words, how Sally talks about other people, her interests, the work world, and things of that sort, how clearly can you immediately sense or intuitively know the kind of person Sally actually is? Okay? That's what this is all about. You either have a crystal clear perception, you have a clear perception. So clear is good, crystal clear is excellent. All right? Maybe you see this person visibly. All right? It's limited. If you are seeing people in a visible sense, you have a limited ability to perceive the differences in what you're viewing. So it's a clouded perception where many aspects of the dimension are missing. What does that mean? It means I can't clearly see into people. So the lesser my clarity, the greater the distance between me and that person. Okay? So this is known as emotional distancing. Now, if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, when I make judgments about political things or situations or maybe something that's in the news or whatever, you may see some of this language when I'm speaking or when I'm writing. I'll talk about emotional distancing or something like that. This is what that's all about. Creating emotional distance between you and other human beings. The greater the distance, the less you can see or perceive about the person. And then the final level of clarity is known as transitional. It's a very poor perception of what is being viewed. It's pretty much blind. I think I could say that with confidence. It's really a blind view. It's a highly diminished clarity that exposes you to errors in judgment when making decisions about an individual you can't see. Okay? So if I can't see what I am looking at, what am I going to rely on for making a decision about the object in view? I'm going to rely on what I already think. Now, what I already think could be true, it could be partially true, or it could be completely false. And it really doesn't matter, because if my level of perception is basically blind, okay, think of being legally blind, then I have to rely on what I already think. Let's say I cook you a meal and bring it to you and you're legally blind. So you're looking at your plate, but you don't know what it is. What are you going to rely on? Your sense of smell, right? Your sense of taste, okay? You're going to rely on other preset ideas about what you're eating. If your taste buds are off, you got a problem. You're not going to be able to figure out what you're eating. If your sense of smell is distorted, you're going to be wrong. You know, they can blindfold people, and they've done this. You may have seen this. And they give them an onion and tell them it's an apple. And they'll bite it, and, you know, because they expected it to be an apple, it kind of tasted like an apple. How about me, for example? I can remember thinking I was going to drink a Coke and it was an iced tea. But I was convinced, for whatever the reason being, that it was a Coke. And so when I drank it, I said to my wife, "This Coke is flat." I still thought it was a Coke, but it was flat. It had no fizz. I didn't think it was iced tea until I took the lid off, went in there, smelled it, you know, like, what the heck's wrong with this drink? And then, oh, this is iced tea. But you see, because I perceived it to be what I thought it was, but was unable to see it, then I tricked my senses into believing it was something it wasn't. This is what we do with everything, people. Okay? All right. Those are the levels of clarity when it comes to perceiving. And so this world dimension really as a whole, it reflects how well we will understand what other people are feeling. This is the intuitive empathetic piece. How well I understand and I'm responding to what is happening around me in a functional sense. This is the extrinsic dimension of doing. And then how well I understand, what needs to be done and when it should be done in a structural, organized sense, which is the systemic thinking dimension. What do I think, right? What do I believe about how this should be done? So when scores are higher within these dimensions, they reflect a higher degree of valuation. So what are we really talking about when we think about an HVP or a Hartman value profile? We're thinking about, you ready? I'm going to give you one word here. We're thinking about meaning, okay? It's about meaning, right? So we're measuring your sense of meaning in the world, all right? That's really what this is all about. How meaningful something is determined by whether or not you value it or you disvalue it, okay? And there's two realms of valuation. There's the compositional realm, and there's, let me talk about the composition. The composition realm is really based upon the good things that we're perceiving, and then the transpositional position are the bad things, okay? So really, the HVP report is about good and bad, okay? We're measuring good and bad. That's what the HVP measures, all right? And so remember, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, I believe, that Hartman, he defined value a little differently from how he defined good. So good is basically the fulfillment of a concept, but value it is our most inclusive world that covers all other value words, all right? So a value word could be fair, good, bad, cool, evil, average, things like that. No good. Oh, that's no good. You don't want to eat that. That's no good. So it's disvalued, right? Oh, you want to have a piece of that pie. It's excellent, right? So what am I saying? I'm overvaluing the piece of pie. So we value things or we will disvalue things. We see things and perceive things. Whoa, this just triggered something. In the New Testament of the Bible, in the book of Matthew, Jesus talks about the Jewish leaders of the first century, and he says about them, I can't recall right now offhand where this is, but he says that though seeing, they see not, though hearing, they hear not. So there's, what does he mean? Even though they see, they can't see. So what he's saying is, although they can see, they are limited in their ability to perceive, which is to see into. So their seeing is only surface. There's no perception. Although they hear the words spoken, they do not perceive what the words actually mean. So although they hear, they don't really hear. That's why many times in the New Testament, when somebody is speaking primarily the Jesus figure, he says, he that has an ear, let him hear. So if you've got ears, listen, but if you've got perception, then perceive. Okay? And that's what those things are about. So this is kind of a sagistic way of saying, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Oh my God. How many people do you know are talking, but they don't know what they're talking about? They're seeing, but they're not perceiving. They're listening, but they're not hearing, right? This happens all the time. Even maybe if you have kids, you're talking to them and they're looking at you and kind of spacily nodding, but they're not getting it, right? They're hearing, but they're not perceiving the words, what they actually mean. And these things are very important. I know this is a little deep, but it's important. Like, your level of perception is going to make or break you, folks, especially in the work world. All right, back to the world dimension of work and balance. So there has to be a sense of balance between the intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic dimensions within the single dimension of world. There has to be a balance, and oftentimes there isn't. Okay? All right. So, what do I want to say here? This is the problem when you don't have notes. Really. Okay. Let's talk about your brain bias, okay? Or your attention level. So I want you to think about your clarity level we just talked about. So your level of perceptibility, your level of perception. And now we're going to talk about your level of attention. Okay. Now you either have positive attention or you have negative attention. And really, this is the valuation piece. All right. But it's a different way of saying it. So positive attention is a heavy focus of attention and bias, all right, towards the dimension to where nothing else exists. Now, you can have two levels of attention. You can have over-attentive and attentive. Those are the two different levels of attention. You're either paying attention or you're paying excessive attention. Now, when it comes to negative attention, it's disregarding the dimension and undervaluing the present qualities of that object, okay? Because we're talking about value objects. The object or the subject of what is being valued. So there's a cautious piece or a over inattentive piece. So you could be really not paying attention, or you're really disvaluing, or you're just disvaluing parts and pieces of it. And that's what you need to understand. So again, let me reiterate. We have levels of perception. So how clearly can I see and perceive what I'm looking at? So we'll use empathy as a situation here as an example. And there's practical thinking and systems judgment, remember. So we're just picking one of them. So how clearly can I perceive this person's motives? How clearly can I perceive this person's pain? How clearly can I see if this person's confused? How clearly can I perceive the inner workings and thinkings of this individual? And then when I'm looking at these things, how attentive or how much value am I placing on what I'm seeing? Okay, I hope that covers it for you. And if you need to go back and listen to it, then go ahead and do that. So now let's talk about the balance piece. So I'm going to look at this profile here of a person. We'll call John. Okay, that's not the name, but we're going to say John. So I'm looking at John's world scores, and John is unconventional. Now, I never brought that up. So I need to do that. What is, unconventionality? All right. What if someone is unconventional? Really, unconventionality is more creative. Because it's focusing on certain aspects of what's being perceived that other people miss. All right? That's important. They're likely present, but most people overlook it. They don't notice it. So unconventional thinkers are your innovative people, because they see things and come up with things most people don't come up with. Okay? Good example of that would be Steve Jobs. He's unconventional. And so unconventional people, they see clearly, but they see specific dimensions that most people of a more traditional sense are missing. And these people, to be honest with you, make up about 16% of the population. And when it comes to entrepreneurs, they're almost 45% of the population of entrepreneurs. So that makes sense, right? Okay, so the individual I'm looking at is unconventional. Now, I kind of came up with this on my own, but I consider there being 3 levels of unconventionality. There's a level 1, there's a level 2, and a level 3, right? So depending upon how high the level is, determines the level of intensity in the... Oh my God. Okay, sorry about that. Let me get back to this. So unconventionality has levels of intensity. I got to take a drink of my coffee. Hold on. All right. A little cold. Okay. So this person, I'm going to consider a type 2. And that's because out of 3 dimensions, 2 of them are unconventional. Now, within the types, there are levels again, and I don't want to get too deep into that. There can be severe unconventionality, limited unconventionality, like mild unconventionality. And so this is not severe. But anyway, let's look at it. So I'm looking at, number 1, I'm looking at their empathy. In their level of clarity out of 100 is 90. Okay, so what is that? It's crystal clear. Okay, so when this person is looking at other human beings, they can easily and fully perceive those people. So this person's highly intuitive, okay? Highly intuitive. This is a feeling piece. Now, when you're intuitive, you're relying on a level of emotion that is much stronger than most people. Okay, so I don't know why I'm feeling so confused right now. And I think it's because my eyes are looking at, the sound waves on the software where I'm speaking, and I'm looking at those sound waves, and as I'm doing that, it's distracting me. So that's interesting, isn't it? You see, you probably noticed when it started happening. I started the thing because I couldn't think, because I can't do multiples. I do one thing at a time, and then when I get distracted by this piece over here, it takes away from what I was doing. So it's almost like I was holding something and then I lost it and I didn't know where it went, because my attention was focused on something else. So what do we call that? It's distraction, folks. It's inattentiveness. And so you just witnessed it right here, folks. 11:02 a.m. on Wednesday, October 23rd. You witnessed it right here. Okay, so this person has very strong empathy, so they have very clear, crystal clear perception when it comes to people. Now, their attention, where's their attention? Well, it's 85% negative, 15% positive. What does that mean? It means they undervalue what they're looking at. Okay? So although they see clearly the good, the bad, the ugly of people, they're undervaluing what is good. So when they see something good, they treat it as not as good as it actually is. So what does that look like? Well, let's just say this person they're looking at gave some money to a charity. They might think, yeah, they're just doing that because they get tons of money. They're trying to make themselves look good. You see? So the good in giving to the charity is disvalued. Okay? So if you disvalue a good item, what are you doing? You're making a good thing bad. Okay? You're really making a good thing bad, or not as good as it actually is. So people that are like this are what? Cynical. Okay? So this person is cynical. So when he sees an act of kindness, he believes the reason behind it isn't good, even if it is. Okay? So this is a choice. And I say it's a choice because they have crystal clear clarity. In other words, they know better. They know better. They know for a fact that this person is doing a good deed, but they're choosing to criticize it. Now, why would anybody do that? I am so glad you asked. They're doing this likely because of some bad experiences where good people did bad things. And in their mind, in order to protect themselves, they become critical and cynical so not to be taken advantage of. Oh, is this doing to you what it's doing to me? Do you know why I do this for a living? I mean, oh my God, it feels so good. It just thinking about these things. It's so cool. Okay, let's look at this other dimension. Remember I said this person's not very balanced, okay? So balanced has to do with a couple things: clarity, which is perception, and attention, okay? All right, so inattentive in the empathetic sphere, and now we're going to look at the extrinsic sphere, which is really about doing things, right? Remember, the time is now. And so when it comes to knowing what to do and when to do it, they're unconventional here. All right? They're unconventional. So what does that mean? Well, this means their practical thinking piece is basically creative. They're looking at specifics. Okay. So remember, practical thinking measures your capacity for practical judgment making. This is seeing and understanding really the consequences of your choices and actions and what kind of results you're likely going to get when acting on something. When it comes to the attention levels associated with practical thinking, we're measuring whether or not you're focused on the direct benefits of doing this right now, or the negative risks associated with doing this right now, right? That's the attention piece. How clearly is this individual, even though they're unconventional, able to see? So they're coming in at a 66, okay? So that's clear. It's not unclear. It's clear. It's not crystal clear, but it's clear. So they can see clearly, but what are they looking at clearly? They're looking at certain aspects associated with what to do right now in this particular situation in order to get these particular results, okay? So if I say to this person, if I say to John, here's what I need you to do, buddy. I need you to make sure this, and this. Now, when I say that, he's not likely going to agree with me. And the reason being is because he sees unconventionally. You either see conventionally or unconventionally. What's the difference? Conventionally is what most everyone is seeing. Unconventionally is what most people are not seeing. So when I tell you, here's what I need you to do, that's not likely what you would have thought to do if you were on your own. So immediately, there's a little bit of disagreement with perception, or there's a little bit of disagreement about what should be done. Okay? Now, John may not voice that. He may be looking at me and then be a little confused. Okay? He may not say a word, but he's thinking, why would they do it like that in his mind? Because he's unconventional. He's not looking at all the aspects of what needs to be done to get that result. He's looking at a specific aspect of what needs to be done to get the result. And it's likely something, if I'm conventional, I've already overlooked. I'm not seeing it. Now, this could make him either an asset to me because he's seeing what I'm not seeing, or a liability. I don't know which, okay? But it's going to be one or the other. Now, before we get into that, what is his level of attention? Okay, it's a 75 positive, okay? So when he looks at what needs to be done, he's overvaluing the positive results that can come by doing something right now, okay? He's not weighing the risks. What he's doing is he's overly attentive to getting the result as soon as possible. Okay? I want these benefits right now. Okay? So this means he's going to be very results oriented. Very results oriented. But the way he's going to go about getting those results is likely going to be different than most people. Good or bad? Well, we don't know. We don't know. This is why assessing people is not a predictor of performance. It's a predictor of meaning. Okay? To him, to this person, to John, it's super meaningful that I use creative ways of getting things done immediately. That's where the meaning is for John. Okay? All right, let's look at the third dimension within the world dimension, his systemic thinking. Okay? So the systemic thinking piece is less clear. Okay? So remember, his empathy is 90% conventionally clear, so it's crystal clear. This guy's an intuitive, so I'll say he's like an empath. His execution ability or results orientation is clear, not crystal clear, it's clear and unconventional. And then his planning ability or his systemic thinking, what he believes ought to be. So it's about one thing about getting it done. It's another thing about how we ought to do it in order to get it done. Okay? He's clear, but less clear. Okay? He's only a 50. All right? 45 is unclear. So you see, he's getting closer to unclear, so we know his clarity is dropping. So let's say his empathy is better than 20/20 vision. Let's say it's 15/15. Okay, so he's eagle eye when it comes to seeing people and understanding people and perceiving people. He's regular. He's 20/20 when it comes to seeing what needs to be done. And let's say he's 30/30. He needs glasses. He's got astigmatism. He's got astigmatism when it comes to how he thinks it ought to be. Okay, now this is where it's going to get really interesting. When I look at his level of attention to how things should be, it's 55% negative. All right? 55% negative. So we got unconventionality. So this is about, remember, measuring John's ability for seeing and appreciating, proper order of things, how things should be, organizational thinking, structured thinking. This deals with protocols and rules and planning and long-range planning. Remember, this is future. It's not now and it's not infinity. It's future. So this is about establishing guidelines while attempting to achieve particular results that we're looking for within our extrinsic dimension. All right? So super important here. And so because he's unconventional and negative cautious, right, when it comes to how things ought to be, this is how it's going to play out. If I say, John, here's how you need to do this. Here's how it ought to be. He immediately disagrees. He's going to immediately disagree. Why? Number one, he's unconventional. So he's looking at the part of how this should be that I'm overlooking. There are many, many parts. It doesn't mean they're all correct. There are just many ways of doing stuff. All right? So he's looking at what I'm not looking at. He's looking at more creative, alternative ways. All right? Unorthodox, out of the box. All right? Alternative ways of doing something. So what does this make him? It makes him a nonconformist who's going to either overtly or covertly challenge my idea about how I think it should be. All right? So that is out of balance with his empathy. Okay, his empathy is crystal clear. His intuition is crystal clear. But his clarity on how things ought to be isn't very clear, and it's unconventional. So there's a lack of balance. All right? So now what? What does that mean when there's a lack of balance here? It's going to mean that because he's negative, not a lot negative, but he's negative by 5 points. He's 55% negative. If he was 50% negative, he'd be also 50% positive. It would be 50-50, which is balanced, right? He's not balanced. It's not 50-50. It's 45-55, 55% negative, all right? What about his results orientation? 75-35. Does that sound like 50-50 to you? Is that balanced? No, that's not balanced. What about his attention levels in his empathetic sense? It's 85-15. Is that 50-50? No, that's out of balance. He's got no equilibrium in his outer world. None. He's way out of whack here. So what's that going to look like? He's going to break the rules and not care who it hurts because he's negative empathetic and he's negative systemic and unconventional. And he's going to push it through to get it done if you're not looking. Boom. Holy smokes. Wow. Did that just do to you what it did to me? Can you imagine being able to read people like this? You can, right? It takes a long time to get it down, but you can. After a while, when working with people, knowing people, you can start to figure this stuff out without analyzing, without profiling. In a hard sense, meaning running them through an actual profile, you can start figuring things out real quick. And over the last many, many years of doing this, this is why, all of our clients talk to us. We don't just send them, 20 reports a month. They run them without conversations. We run reports in an effort to we're locating an individual's mindset of meaning. We're locating it. We know what is meaningful and what is not meaningful, and therefore it's going to determine what they're likely going to do in a given situation, good or bad. Okay? And what is it going to depend on? Who they're doing it with, who they're doing it for, and what it is they're actually doing. Oh man, I'm tired from doing this. I'm going to sip my coffee. And I'm going to call it quits. I could talk about this all day, but that's all I'm going to do right now. So we're talking about you walking around in the world and viewing the world around you. What does that look like? How do you perceive it? How clearly can you see it? What are you paying attention to? What are you valuing? What are you overvaluing? What are you undervaluing in the world? Because it's going to determine how you approach everything. That's it. This has been Steve Sisler. You've been listening to the Behavioral Insights Podcast.